Nostalgia is a powerful sensation. Nostalgia is defined as a complex emotional experience characterized by a longing or sentimental yearning for the past. It's often associated with positive feelings and a sense of warmth, but it can also evoke a sense of bittersweetness. Nostalgia is often capitalized on by the media and marketing, but it is mainly utilized by the entertainment industry. Dusting off our old pals and revisiting stories from our past can definitely evoke strong emotions and drive engagement. And that is why I understood the sudden influx of all these Rewatch podcasts. Rewatch podcasts are a type of podcast where the hosts revisit and discuss TV shows, movies, or other forms of media that they have already watched in the past. These podcasts often focus on older or classic series and films, providing a retrospective analysis and commentary. Typically, Rewatch podcasts follow a format where the host watches a specific episode or film in advance and then come together to discuss it in detail. They may analyze the plot, characters, themes, and production aspects, offering their own perspectives and opinions. Most of these Rewatch podcasts have been created and hosted by the actors that were actually in the original TV show or movie. Many people have a strong attachment to TV shows, movies, and other media from their past. Rewatch podcasts allow them to relive those memories and revisit the stories and characters they love. Let's face it, we're all secretly stuck in a time loop with our favorite TV shows and movies from way back when. These rewatches, they're like time machines that let us hang out with our fictional pals all over again and get our nostalgia fix. So I get the idea behind them all, but after listening to the clips of these podcasts, I kept finding myself getting annoyed. The reason I wanted to make this video was mainly because of how disgusted I got when looking at my suggested reels on Instagram, constantly being either clips of these shows or these horrible TikTok promos that just give me the douche chills. I watched one clip of the Nez Declassified podcast trying to see what Mose is up to these days, and now my algorithm has been taken over by this nonsense. At the helm of this trend of, quote, rewatch podcasts stands a company known as Podco. Podco produces a lot of these podcasts, and their shows mainly focus on old Nickelodeon and Disney shows. Some of their shows include Wizards of Waverly Pod, Nez Declassified Podcast Survival Guide, and the Even More Stevens podcast. I do give Christy Carlson Romano credit for creating this podcasting empire. She founded Podco along with her husband, and it seems to be working pretty well. She clearly identified a gap in the marketplace and took the opportunity. And it seems that all these podcasts that are associated with Podco get listens and likes, so good for them. But, to me, there are too many glaring issues with these shows to be sustainable. Full disclosure, I was a fan of most of these shows that are subjects on Rewatch podcasts. I mean, clearly they're going to rewatch something that was popular. Except for Wizards of Waverly Place, obviously, because that show was shit. I'm kidding, I never watched it. But these shows, for the most part, were my childhood. I like Ned Declassified for being naturally funny with ridiculous characters. Also, Susie Crabgrass was fire for me when I was a kid. I thought Even Stevens was amazing, but that was mostly because I think Louis Stevens was probably the best Disney Channel character ever. And Boy Meets World is probably my favorite show of all time. But with all that being said, I couldn't help but notice the problems that I kept thinking about when it came to all these podcasts. I'm going to focus the problems on a few podcasts, mainly the ones I just mentioned, because there are a ridiculous amount of these types of shows. But you'll likely see that these problems connect to most of them. The first thing you notice about Rewatch podcasts is the host, obviously. What's better than listening to the legendary cast of a show and getting the inside scoop from the people that were actually there? But if you go through these Rewatch podcasts, time and time again you'll see that the main character is not there. Why would I want to listen to a Boy Meets World podcast if the boy himself isn't there? Even Stevens follows the rivalry between brother and sister, Louis and Ren Stevens, yet Louis is not there, but don't worry, Beans is. The most egregious lack of star power is from the Wizards of Waverly Pod, where the hosts are the dad and the wacky best friend. I get it. Ben Savage is running for public office, and it isn't like you could just force Shia LaBeouf or Selena Gomez to join a podcast. But in my opinion, why would the audience want to hear from the third, fourth, or fifth member of the cast of a popular show from years ago if even the main character doesn't want to be there? This would be like if an iCarly rewatch podcast started, and the hosts were Gibby and the guy who gave out the smoothies. I do have to give credit to the Nez Declassified podcast for having the three main stars all together to talk about the show. If it were 2 out of the 3, it would still be pretty good compared to the other shows. But all 3, including the actor who played the title character, is great and apparently very rare. Now, the moment these podcasts started popping up, this was the first issue that came to my mind. There's a clear endpoint in all of these podcasts. What happens when you run out of episodes to rewatch? Ned's Declassified only lasted 54 episodes, so what happens after the last rewatch? The podcast just goes away? It is a lose-lose situation. What if the audience really enjoys this podcast and they just decide to end it because there are no more episodes? What if they keep going with the podcast without any new episodes and the audience just gets bored with them? All these podcasts have a set formula where they either watch an episode of the show they were on and discuss it, or they have a special guest. Ned's podcast had the Bully Guy and even the legendary Coconut Head. The Boy Meets World podcast has had Daniel Harris, Mr. Turner, and other guest stars and crew from the legendary show. But the issue here is those guests are going to run out, just like the episodes are. We can't have episode 520 of the Boy Meets World podcast where they talk to the random extra that walked by the camera once. Just recently, the Pod Meets World podcast had Zach Morris on from Saved by the Bell. Was he ever on the show? No. So basically, it was a 90s Child Stars Anonymous meeting. A lot of the remember whens and not a lot of, wow, you're still doing something. To have a set end goes against what podcasts really are. A big point of podcasts and radio shows are their consistency, where fans will be able to listen to a new episode every day or every week. Now, I'm aware there are things like limited series where the audience knows there are a set number of episodes, and that is it. But to me, a limited podcast just seems like a waste. This could be nitpicking because I'm sure fans of these types of podcasts don't really care that they know these shows will eventually end, because they are just happy to be getting anything from their favorite TV shows from the past. But to me, to have a podcast that is limited right from the jump seems to be counterintuitive, but that is just my opinion. Everyone knows a guy in his 50s who still talks about his high school football days where he was the greatest. Or an older woman that looks like she is made of wax because she wants to remain youthful. I'm sure there are people out there that are fine with those types who try to live in the past. But to me, it is just annoying, and to have a podcast where that is all you do is infuriating. Now, I'm not trying to piss on anyone's Cheerios. If you're someone who peaked in high school, good for you. I haven't peaked ever, so you're already a step above me. But to live in the past where times were better seems sad when you have a future. I would understand a podcast where someone in their 70s is telling you their life through stories, because they have a lot more yesterdays than tomorrows. However, these podcasts have hosts that, for the most part, could still have careers. A lot of these podcasts, most predominantly Wizards of Waverly podcast and Ned's Declassified, have hosts that are clamoring for reboots. Now, that could be because they really feel there are stories left to tell, and the Ned's podcast idea for a reboot about a survival guide for adults sounds like an actual fun idea. But the cynical part of me thinks it's mainly because this was the peak of their careers, and they can't find anything else to replicate that success. I haven't seen the two from Wizards podcast in anything since, and apparently Cookie played a torso in the Jeffrey Dahmer series, and Ned's most anticipated role in years was in a very famous movie. However, the movie was famous for all the wrong reasons. Nobody wants to see the 30-year-old hanging out with the high school kids to relive their youth.
That's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age.
These podcasts seem to have been created by the hosts just to bring up the past, because that is when they were stars, and not because they genuinely want to talk about their past for the fans. Allison Stoner, who was a child star in movies like Cheaper by the Dozen 1 and 2, has openly admitted that when she was coming up in the business, she saw herself becoming a narcissist. When it becomes a fairly regular experience that people are doing whatever you say and giving you free things, it is hard to be a regular person, especially when you're receiving this treatment as a child. But what happens when this treatment ends? I feel these actors get stunted in their growth as people because as a child star, you have the world, and when you don't have it anymore, you still expect it. Stoner is one of the few who has openly admitted to having to change her life, and gives credit to the people around her for helping her get out of this narcissistic celebrity way. You have to give credit to those former celebrities who can admit to these things, because most still act like they are in that lifestyle, and it's just embarrassing. That person peaked in high school is a cruel saying, but as a legendary wrestler and former guest star of Boy Meets World, Jake the Snake Roberts says, it's cruel but fair. Now this is the most harsh critique, and this is probably biased, but the hosts of these shows are just actors. I get caught up in celebrity like most people, and watch clips of the late night talk shows where The Rock is promoting some movie where he's in a jungle again, or another actor talks about how much the role changed them and their feelings about some shit that nobody cares about. But then I catch myself for the most part thinking of how much I don't care about these actors' thoughts. Now, I am hypocritical because I am currently reading Matthew McConaughey's book, and it is one of the best things I've ever read, but I think McConaughey is the exception to the rule. But to me, actors, for the most part, are just pretentious assholes.
You'll have nothing to watch but football and mixed martial arts, which are not the arts.
For the past few years, it seems that a lot of the United States has gotten sick and tired of celebrities, and it's mainly because it seems like they act like they are more important than everyone else. Acting is definitely a skill, and great actors can take you on a ride that you can really enjoy and are entertained by, but that doesn't mean their opinion should matter more than anyone else's. On either side of the political spectrum, you can see actors that will annoy you with their opinions on whatever controversial idea is out there in the public. Everyone has opinions, but it is the way that actors seem to be preaching down to their audiences like they are some grand, high, exalted mystic ruler, which makes the real issue. Again, this could just be my opinion, but the numbers don't lie. Award show ratings have fallen drastically, and a lot of people believe it is because of these celebrities preaching at the masses about how shitty the public has been, and how dare the peasants keep using gas ovens, while celebrities and politicians fly private across the world. Now, what does this rant have to do with Rewatch Podcasts? All these podcasts are hosted by actors, and none of the hosts are the actual creators of these shows. Actors discussing what they are in is a lot different than listening to the writers discuss their show. By and large, these shows were successful because of the writers and the creators. That doesn't mean the actors were nothing, and these actors could have critiques of what they were in, but who really cares? They read lines off the page that someone else has written. Louis C.K. said it best: an actor is like an empty cup hoping someone will pour some coffee into it. It is almost as if great actors have to be empty personalities in order to be good at what they do. It might take an empty vessel type person, who is open and adapting to a new personality every project, to be that talented. Once again, it is a great skill, but we as an audience love the characters these people play, and usually don't know anything about the actors themselves, and for the most part, people usually don't care. I have never been a fan of the movie commentary special feature from the people that are actually in the movie, so maybe this niche isn't really for me. These podcasts are clearly successful. A lot of them have ended up going on tour doing live shows and have audiences coming out for them. But for me, I just don't get it. There are too many podcasts as it is, and I'd rather stick with the ones that are actually good. In this age of constant nostalgia, let us not settle for shallow recaps and boring discussions on once upon a time celebrity. We can support content creators who strive for originality, even if it means venturing beyond our childhood favorites.